The deep space research ship UCS Meridian moved through the darkness between stars like a metal whale, swimming through an endless ocean. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the screens that showed nothing but empty space and distant points of light. His crew had been out here for 6 months studying old alien ruins on dead planets, and Jake was getting tired of finding nothing but rocks and broken metal. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez sat at her station listening to the usual sounds of space, which was mostly nothing at all. The communication equipment picked up cosmic radiation and the occasional signal from Earth, but today something was different. A pattern in the static made her sit up straight and adjust her controls. The sound was not random like radiation should be, but had a rhythm, like someone tapping out a message. Amy called out to Captain Morrison, who walked over to look at her screens. The signal was weak but clearly made by intelligence and not nature. It used mathematical patterns that any smart species would recognize, like prime numbers and the value of pi. Amy recorded everything, while Dr. Lisa Bennett hurried over from her science station. Dr. Bennett was the ship's expert on alien languages and had spent years learning how different species might try to talk to each other. She plugged the signal into the ship's computer and started working on translation. The math was easy to understand, but the actual message took hours to figure out. When she finally broke the code, her face went white with fear. The message was a cry for help from beings who called themselves the Kethvar. They said they lived on planets far from human space and were being destroyed by something they called the Devourers. These creatures ate everything in their path, including planets and stars, and left nothing behind but empty space. The Kethvar had tried to fight, but their weapons did nothing and their people were dying. What made Jake's blood run cold was the part about humanity. The aliens had somehow heard stories about humans from other species and thought they might be warriors who could help. They begged any humans who received the message to come and save them before their entire race was wiped out. The message had been sent over and over for weeks, growing weaker as their power systems failed. Commander Ryan Davis listened to the translation and shook his head. He thought it might be a trap or a mistake because humanity had never fought a real war in space. Earth's military was small and focused on exploring new worlds, not fighting alien monsters. Most human ships carried scientists and diplomats, not soldiers and weapons. But Dr. Bennett pointed out details in the message that would be almost impossible to fake. The aliens described physics and astronomy in ways that showed they really understood science. Their fear seemed genuine, and their description of the Devourers matched theories about what could threaten entire star systems. She believed the message was real, and the threat was as bad as they claimed. Captain Morrison had to make a choice that would change everything. He could ignore the message and continue his research mission, or he could break protocol and respond to aliens who might be lying or might be telling the truth about the most dangerous threat the galaxy had ever seen. The smart choice was to report back to Earth and let someone else decide, but that would take months and the aliens might be dead by then. Jake thought about his duty as a human officer and his responsibility to any species asking for help. He also thought about what might happen if these Devourers were real and humanity did nothing to stop them. If they could destroy alien civilizations, they might eventually reach Earth and humanity would face the same fate as the Kethvar. Amy worked on boosting their transmitter power while Dr. Bennett prepared a response message. The reply would be simple, but it would let the aliens know that humans had received their call for help and would try to do something about it. Jake knew that sending any response would commit humanity to action whether they were ready or not. The message went out into space, carrying humanity's promise to help. None of the crew realized they had just made the most important decision in human history. The signal would reach Earth in days and trigger events that would transform humanity from peaceful explorers into the most feared warriors the galaxy had ever seen. As the Meridian continued on its mission, Jake wondered if he had made the right choice. He had responded to a desperate plea from aliens he had never met about an enemy he did not understand. But something deep inside him knew that humans would not ignore a call for help, even if it meant facing impossible odds. The bridge crew worked quietly as their message traveled through space toward Earth. They did not know that their decision to answer an alien SOS would soon wake up something in humanity that had been sleeping since the species first reached for the stars. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had conquered their own world through thousands of years of warfare. In the days that followed, the crew tried to continue their research, but everyone's mind was on the alien message. They monitored space for more signals and wondered what was happening on the Kethvar worlds. Jake filed his report to Earth and waited for orders that he knew would change everything for his species and for the galaxy itself. The message from the UCS Meridian reached Earth 3 days later, and immediately caused chaos in the government buildings of Geneva, where the United Earth Defense Council met. Admiral Patricia Kane was eating breakfast when her emergency communicator started screaming with urgent signals from military headquarters. She dropped everything and rushed to the command center where dozens of officials were already arguing about what to do. The alien distress call had been verified as genuine by every expert who studied it. The mathematical proofs and scientific data embedded in the message could not be faked by any known technology. Dr. Martin Cole from the Xenobiological Threat Assessment Division presented his analysis to the emergency council session, and his conclusions terrified everyone in the room. According to the alien data, these devourers were not just another hostile species but something that could end all life in the galaxy. They consumed matter at the atomic level and turned it into more of themselves. They had already destroyed hundreds of worlds and showed no signs of slowing down. If they continued spreading, they would eventually reach every inhabited system, including Earth. Admiral Kane looked at the military resources available to humanity and felt overwhelmed. Earth's defense forces consisted mainly of patrol ships and exploration vessels designed for peaceful contact with alien species. The largest human warships carried sensors and laboratories, not weapons capable of fighting planet-eating monsters. Most military officers had never seen real combat beyond training exercises. The council members debated for hours while precious time slipped away. Some argued that humanity should stay out of alien conflicts and focus on defending Earth. Others insisted that helping the Kethvar was both morally right and strategically necessary, since the devourers would not stop with alien worlds. A few suggested that the whole situation might be beyond human capabilities. Admiral Kane listened to the arguments, but her mind was already made up. She had spent her career preparing for threats to humanity, and this was the biggest threat imaginable. Even if the mission failed, it was better to fight the enemy far from Earth than wait for them to arrive at humanity's doorstep. She stood up and called for silence in the council chamber. The Admiral announced her decision to activate Protocol 7, which was a theoretical plan for total military mobilization that had never been used. The protocol allowed military leadership to commandeer civilian resources and convert the entire human economy into a war machine. Within minutes of her announcement, emergency signals went out to every human world and space station. Captain Nicole Harper was conducting routine patrol duties near Mars when her ship received new orders. The UCS Valiant and hundreds of other vessels were commanded to report immediately to military shipyards for emergency retrofitting. Nicole had no idea what was happening, but the priority codes meant she had to obey without question. The human industrial machine began transforming with frightening speed. Factories that built mining equipment started producing weapons instead. Shipyards designed for cargo vessels began installing armor and missile systems. Research facilities that studied peaceful technologies were ordered to weaponize everything they had learned about physics and engineering. What amazed observers was how quickly humans adapted to the crisis. Other species typically took years or decades to mobilize for war, but humanity accomplished the same task in days. The difference was that humans had never really stopped being warriors, despite their peaceful exploration of space. Their entire civilization was built on thousands of years of conflict and competition. Admiral Kane established her command center on Luna Base and coordinated the largest military buildup in human history. Ships were built using modular construction, techniques that allowed entire vessels to be assembled in weeks instead of years. Weapon systems that had existed only in computer simulations were rushed into production without extensive testing. The civilian population supported the military effort with enthusiasm that surprised even government leaders. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, and civilian ships reported for conversion duties. Miners volunteered to pilot weapons platforms, and cargo haulers offered to carry troops and supplies. The entire species seemed to understand that this fight was about survival. Dr. Cole worked with teams of scientists to analyze every piece of data about the devourers and develop countermeasures. The aliens had provided detailed information about enemy capabilities and weaknesses, Human researchers used this data to design weapons specifically intended to disrupt the Devourer's molecular consumption process. Within 2 weeks of receiving the alien message, humanity had assembled a fleet that dwarfed anything in their previous military history. Over 2,000 combat vessels of various sizes filled the space around Earth and Mars. Fighter squadrons numbered in the tens of thousands, and support ships carried enough supplies for extended campaigns far from home. The speed of human mobilization shocked even their own leaders, who had not realized how quickly their species could transition from peaceful exploration to total war. The industrial capacity that had built colonies on distant worlds was redirected toward building instruments of destruction. The same drive that had carried humans to the stars now focused on preparing for battle. Admiral Kane reviewed the final fleet reports and felt both pride and fear at what humanity had accomplished. In just 2 weeks, they had created a military force capable of challenging any known threat. But she also understood that this transformation revealed something about human nature that might frighten the very aliens they were trying to save. As the fleet prepared for departure, Kane wondered if they were making a mistake by showing the galaxy what humans were truly capable of when threatened. The peaceful explorers and diplomats that other species knew were about to be replaced by warriors whose ancestors had conquered an entire planet through superior violence and technology. Admiral Steve Parker stood on the bridge of the UCS Devastator and watched the human fleet assemble in space around Earth. The massive ship had been built in 3 weeks using construction techniques that other species would consider impossible. Every available shipyard had worked around the clock using modular designs that allowed sections to be built separately and joined together like giant puzzle pieces. The Devastator was not just a warship but a mobile command center and weapons platform unlike anything humanity had ever created. Its hull bristled with missile launchers converted from mining equipment and energy weapons based on asteroid-cutting tools. The engineering teams had taken peaceful technologies and transformed them into instruments of war with an efficiency that surprised even the designers. Lieutenant Commander Tony Rivera reported fleet status from his tactical station, and the numbers seemed impossible even to him. Over 2,000 combat vessels of various sizes now surrounded Earth, from converted cargo ships to purpose-built destroyers. Civilian vessels had been transformed into missile platforms overnight, while passenger ships became troop transports and fighter carriers. What made the fleet truly terrifying was not just its size, but the mindset of its crews. Humans had approached the conversion process with the same determination they used to colonize hostile worlds. Every problem was solved through engineering and willpower. When existing weapons were not powerful enough, they built bigger ones. When ships were not fast enough, they stripped out everything non-essential to add more engines. Captain Kate Sullivan commanded the reconnaissance ship UCS Pathfinder, which would lead the advanced scouts toward Kethavar space. Her vessel had been a civilian research ship just weeks earlier, but now carried sensors designed to track enemy movements and weapons, capable of destroying targets much larger than itself. The transformation amazed her crew, who had gone from scientists to warriors almost overnight. The fleet included innovations that would have seemed insane to other species. Mining ships had been converted into kinetic weapons platforms that could accelerate asteroids to devastating velocities. Construction equipment became siege engines capable of tearing apart enemy vessels. Even medical ships carried weapons disguised as humanitarian supplies. Admiral Parker coordinated with fleet commanders across the solar system as final preparations were completed. The logistics of moving such a large force across interstellar distances required careful planning and massive amounts of supplies. Human engineers had solved these problems by creating mobile factories and resource processing ships that could operate independently for years. The cultural transformation was as dramatic as the military buildup. Humans who had spent generations focused on peaceful exploration and scientific research suddenly embraced their warrior heritage. The same species that had conquered Earth through superior tactics and technology now prepared to export those capabilities to the stars. Dr. Bennett had been transferred from the Meridian to Admiral Kane's staff, where she worked on communication protocols with the Kethavar. The aliens had continued sending updates about their situation, and the news was getting worse. The Devourers had consumed 3 more star systems and were approaching the last major Kethavar population centers. What shocked Dr. Bennett about the alien communications was their growing amazement at humanity's response. The Kethvar had expected maybe a few ships or a small military unit. Instead, they were witnessing the mobilization of an entire species for war. Their messages now contained as much fear of their rescuers as gratitude for the help. Captain Sullivan's scouts departed first to establish communication links and assess the situation in Kethvar space. The main fleet would follow once advance teams confirmed the alien reports and identified optimal attack routes. The scouts carried the most advanced sensors and communication equipment humanity could build in such a short time. The journey to Kethvar space would take several weeks, even with humanity's fastest ships. During the voyage, the fleet would continue training and preparing for combat against an enemy, unlike anything they had ever faced. The Devourers represented a threat that could not be negotiated with or deterred through traditional diplomacy. Admiral Parker reviewed intelligence reports about Devourer capabilities and felt both confidence and concern. Human weapons should be effective against the enemy's molecular consumption process, but the aliens had overwhelming numbers and had been fighting for much longer. The key to victory would be humanity's willingness to accept casualties and take risks that other species considered suicidal. The fleet's departure from Earth was witnessed by billions of people who understood. They were watching history being made. Humanity was leaving their home system not as explorers or diplomats, but as warriors responding to a call for help from aliens they had never met. The decision would define their species' role in the galaxy for generations to come. As the ships accelerated toward their destination, Admiral Parker reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Just a month earlier, humanity's biggest concern had been mapping new star systems and establishing trade relationships. Now they were leading the largest military operation in galactic history against enemies that could destroy planets. The transformation revealed something about human nature that had been hidden beneath centuries of civilization and technological progress. When faced with an existential threat, the species reverted to the same aggressive instincts that had made them dominant on Earth. The peaceful facade was gone and the galaxy was about to meet humanity's true face. Behind the main fleet, supply ships and reinforcements continued to launch from Earth and the colonies. The human war machine was now fully activated and would continue producing weapons and warriors until the threat was eliminated or humanity was destroyed. There would be no middle ground in the coming conflict. Captain Kate Sullivan's reconnaissance ships arrived in Kethvar space to find a nightmare that exceeded even their worst fears. The edge of alien territory was marked by empty regions where star systems had once existed. The Devourers had consumed entire solar systems so completely that not even debris remained to mark where billions of beings had once lived. The UCS Pathfinder's sensors detected the approaching human fleet but also picked up massive enemy formations, moving through what had been Kethvar space. The Devourers were not just destroying planets, but systematically consuming every atom of matter they encountered. Their biomechanical ships moved in patterns that suggested intelligence, but no recognizable strategy beyond total consumption. Admiral Kane arrived aboard the fleet carrier, UCS Liberty, to find Sullivan's reports waiting for her. The situation was worse than the aliens had described in their original distress call. Only 4 Kethvar worlds remained inhabited, and enemy forces were already surrounding 3 of them. The human fleet had arrived, just in time to witness the extinction of an entire species. First contact with the surviving Kethvar came through Captain Morrison, who had maintained communication links during the journey from Earth. The alien Prime Minister, Veltar, spoke directly with Admiral Kane through translation protocols that Dr. Bennett had refined during the voyage. The conversation revealed how desperate the situation had become. The Kethvar had been fighting the Devourers for over a year, using conventional weapons and defensive strategies. Their military doctrine emphasized protection of civilian populations and minimal casualties even in combat. This approach had failed completely against enemies that consumed everything in their path, including the weapons used against them. What terrified the aliens almost as much as the Devourers was the scale of humanity's response. The human fleet was larger than all Kethvar military forces throughout their entire history. Veltar expressed gratitude for the help, but also growing concern about what kind of species could mobilize such overwhelming force so quickly. Admiral Kane ordered the fleet to establish defensive positions around the last Kethvar worlds while Scout ships probed enemy formations. The Devourers operated in massive swarms that moved like living organisms, rather than traditional military units. Their ships were grown rather than built and could adapt their configuration based on the threats they encountered. The first engagement occurred when Captain Lucas Wright's destroyer squadron encountered a Devourer scout force near the outer edge of the system. Wright had been ordered to observe and report, but when the enemy ships began consuming a disabled Kethvar transport, his human instincts took over. He ordered his squadron to attack immediately without waiting for authorization. The battle that followed shocked both human and alien observers. The Devourers had overwhelming numerical superiority and weapons that could break down matter at the molecular level. But they had never faced enemies who responded to threats with such aggressive tactics. Wright's destroyers used ramming attacks and suicide runs that other species would consider insane. Commander Beth Adams led fighter squadrons that employed kamikaze tactics against enemy capital ships. Her pilots deliberately crashed their fighters into Devourer vessels while triggering nuclear self-destruct systems. The concept of trading one pilot's life to destroy a larger enemy ship was completely alien to the Devourers, who valued preservation above all else. The human fleet's weapons were specifically designed to disrupt the Devourer's molecular consumption process. Mining lasers had been modified to generate resonance frequencies that interfered with enemy digestion cycles. Kinetic weapons accelerated projectiles to velocities that overwhelmed their absorption capabilities. But what truly devastated the enemy was humanity's tactical doctrine. Human commanders were willing to sacrifice entire ships to achieve strategic objectives. They used damaged vessels as weapons by ramming them into enemy formations. They detonated nuclear charges inside their own ships to maximize damage to surrounding enemies. The Devourer scout force was completely annihilated, but not before transmitting detailed information about human capabilities back to their main swarm. The enemy had never encountered resistance like this, and their collective intelligence struggled to develop countermeasures for opponents who chose death over defeat. Admiral Kane analyzed the battle reports and realized that humanity's greatest advantage was not their technology but their psychology. The Devourers were programmed to preserve themselves while consuming everything else. Humans were willing to destroy themselves to protect others, which created tactical options that the enemy could not predict or counter. The victory came at a cost that horrified the Kethvar observers. Wright's squadron had lost 60% of its ships, and Adams' fighter wing suffered 80% casualties. By human standards, these were acceptable losses for eliminating an enemy force. By alien standards, they represented an unthinkable waste of life. Prime Minister Veltar contacted Admiral Kane to express both gratitude and concern about human tactics. The aliens had never seen warfare conducted with such brutal efficiency. They began to wonder if they had traded one nightmare for another by summoning warriors who treated death as just another weapon. The main Devourer swarm was already adapting to human tactics based on data from the destroyed scouts. Enemy formations began changing their approach patterns and developing new weapons designed specifically to counter human aggression. The next battle would test whether humanity's willingness to die could overcome an enemy that learned from every encounter. Admiral Kane prepared her fleet for the main engagement, knowing that this battle would determine the fate of not just the Kethvar but potentially every species in the galaxy. The humans had proven they could fight the Devourers, but the real test would come when they faced the full power of an enemy that had consumed hundreds of worlds. The main Devourer fleet arrived at the edge of Kethvar space like a dark tide of destruction that blotted out the stars. Admiral Kane watched the sensor readings from her command ship and felt her blood run cold at the scope of the enemy force. Millions of biomechanical vessels stretched across space in formations that defied human understanding of military tactics. The Devourers had learned from their encounter with Wright's squadron and adapted their approach accordingly. Instead of the chaotic swarms they had used against other species, they now moved in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm human ships before they could execute suicide attacks.
The enemy collective intelligence had evolved to
counter humanity's most dangerous tactics. Admiral Parker positioned the UCS Devastator at the center of the human formation and prepared to coordinate the largest space battle in galactic history. His fleet was outnumbered by at least 10-1, but human commanders had faced impossible odds before. The key to victory would be exploiting the enemy's greatest weakness, which was their inability to understand sacrifice. Captain Alex. Chen volunteered to lead the suicide squadron that would penetrate the Devourer formation's core. His ships had been stripped of all defensive systems and loaded with the most powerful explosives humanity could produce. The mission was certain death, but Chen's volunteers understood that their sacrifice might save both human and alien worlds. Dr. Rachel Stone had discovered something crucial about the Devourer: collective consciousness during her analysis of captured enemy material. The hive mind that controlled their entire species became unstable when faced with opponents who chose death over defeat. Human concepts of honor and sacrifice created feedback loops that disrupted their mental cohesion. The battle began when Colonel Sam Hayes led boarding parties against enemy vessels in zero-gravity combat that other species would consider impossible. Human Marines used powered armor and weapons designed for asteroid mining to fight their way into Devourer ships. They planted explosives and fought to the death rather than retreat when surrounded. The boarding actions revealed another weakness in enemy psychology. The Devourers were programmed to consume and preserve their collective existence. They could not understand enemies who deliberately destroyed themselves to deny the enemy victory. This confusion spread through their hive mind and began to affect their tactical coordination. Admiral Kane coordinated multiple simultaneous attacks designed to overwhelm the enemy's ability to adapt. Fighter squadrons led by Commander Adams executed kamikaze runs against capital ships, while destroyer groups rammed larger vessels. Mining ships accelerated asteroids to devastating velocities and launched them into enemy formations. The human fleet's most devastating weapon was not technology, but psychology. Every time the Devourers adapted to one human tactic, the crews developed new ways to sacrifice themselves for victory. Damaged ships became guided missiles. Reactor overloads became area denial weapons. Even life support systems were weaponized by venting atmosphere to create propulsion. Captain Sullivan's reconnaissance. Ships discovered that the enemy's reproduction facilities were located at the center of their formation, protected by the heaviest defenses. These biomechanical factories were essential to the Devourer's ability to replace losses and continue their expansion across the galaxy. Destroying them would cripple the enemy permanently. The assault on the reproduction facilities required Admiral Parker to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Devastator led a direct assault through the heart of the enemy formation, while every other human ship provided covering fire. Parker's crew knew they would not survive, but their attack would create the opening needed for victory. The massive command ship fought its way through waves of enemy vessels using every weapon in its arsenal. Mining lasers carved through enemy hulls, while missile systems launched everything from nuclear warheads to converted cargo containers filled with explosives. The Devastator's crew fought with the desperation of beings who knew their species' survival depended on their success. As Parker's ship reached the enemy core, the feedback loops in the Devourer collective consciousness reached critical levels. The concept of willing self-destruction was so alien to their programming that their entire command structure began to break down. Individual ships stopped following orders and entire formations became confused about their objectives. The reproduction facilities were destroyed when Parker rammed the Devastator directly into the largest biomechanical factory while triggering every explosive device on his ship. The resulting detonation created a chain reaction that consumed the enemy's ability to replace their losses and continue their expansion. With their reproduction capabilities destroyed and their collective consciousness disrupted by human sacrifice, the remaining Devourer forces began to retreat from Kethvar space. The enemy that had consumed hundreds of worlds was broken by opponents who refused to accept defeat. Even when facing certain death, the surviving human ships regrouped around grateful Kethvar worlds to assess the cost of victory. Over half of the fleet had been destroyed and casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands. By any reasonable measure, the losses were catastrophic, but humanity had achieved total victory against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. Prime Minister Feltar contacted Admiral Kane to express his species' gratitude, but also their growing fear of their rescuers. The Kethvar had witnessed warfare on a scale they never imagined possible, conducted by beings who treated death as just another tactical option. They realized they had introduced the galaxy to something unprecedented. Word of the battle spread quickly through galactic communication networks as other species learned about humanity's victory over the Devourers. Some civilizations offered friendship and alliance while others begged the humans to stay away from their space. Earth had become both protector and greatest fear for every species that valued preservation over victory. Admiral Kane's final report to Earth noted that humanity had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. They were no longer the peaceful explorers that other species had known, but warriors whose ancestors had conquered an entire planet through superior violence. The galaxy would measure itself against human capabilities for generations to come, whether in friendship or fear.